Welcome to Speak of the Devils, the premier podcast for Sun Devil football. I'm Brad Denny with 3TV.
And I'm Joe Healy with DevilsDigest.com.
Joe, we made it. College football is back. The Sun Devils are hitting the practice field. The season opener on August 31st is so close. We made it through. It's a good time.
Survival has occurred.
Oh.
So where we are right now, full disclosure, we're recording on Monday evening, the 29th. So we are just, the fall camp opens on the 31st, correct?
9 a.m.
And then, there you go. And then we'll be in August. And when you're in August, in the college football world, you know, like you made it. You know, it's like getting to like Christmas break as a kid. You know, you're not at Christmas yet. It's like a week before or whatever, a few days before. I don't remember that timeline. But you know it's coming. You know you did the hard work. And you can cruise for a little bit. And that's kind of where things are. Because ASU's opener, of course, on August the 31st, a rare but highly appreciated non-Thursday opener.
Yeah.
That's a cool thing. So, yeah, life's all right, man. Fall camp's about to get kicked up. Camp T's about to be a thing here pretty soon. And before long, we'll see what these Devils are made of here in 2024.
So it is time to preview the Sun Devils fall camp. Now, Kenny Dillingham in a pre-camp presser said that only 3 starting spots are really locked down in his mind. I think that might be a little bit of gamesmanship, but you know we'll dive in because there are a lot of battles. There are a lot of players. Of course, there's a lot of new faces on this roster, even some new faces from the course of spring practice to now. So we'll break that all down a little bit. Plus, we'll also be talking to one of those guys that's one of those 3 who has the job that was specifically named by Kenny Dillingham as having one of those jobs locked down in offensive lineman Ben Coleman. So he's going to be joining us a little bit later. Some fun stuff that we'll be happy to unveil. But Joe, before we dive into all that, on the leadership front, obviously so much of what goes on during the course of a season happens in the summer behind closed doors as the leaders of a team start to emerge. Kenny Dillingham unveiled the Pat Tillman Leadership Council, and this is going to be coming with a jersey patch this year.
They don't get the Jordan Simone Pat Tillman jersey for practice?
Not yet, but they're coming with an actual game day patch because even Kenny talked about, that wearing those patches, these 10 guys, it'll spur some some discussion on broadcast television to help further legacy. And, so 8-year-olds watching TV will say, who's Pat Tillman? Tell me more.
There you go. Hey, that's a good thing. And I think I don't think they do Scholar Baller. I might be very much dating myself by bringing that up. I think that was like a Gene Boyd thing back in the day when he was in charge of the academics there. And I think that had a patch too.
It did. Yeah.
So there were times where these sort of things have occurred. And, it's a nice, obviously a great recognition. And like you mentioned on TV, if that's something that, what's that all about? Because we are, at the point, as we know, obviously, Pat Tillman was killed 20 years ago. So there are a lot of people that are, teenagers who weren't on this planet when he was. You know what I'm saying? So to further his legacy, that's a good thing.
So this group of the Pat Tillman Leadership Council does consist of a nice mix, and this was done intentionally, of veterans, but also some of the younger guys, some of the, perhaps foundational pieces of the program in the years to come. So running down this group, starting off in alphabetical order, Xavier Alford, Trenton Bourget, Keyshawn Elliott, Leaf Fatanu, CJ Fight, Sam Levitt, Sean Na'a, Shamari Simmons, Cam Scattaboo, Clayton Smith, Melquan Stovall, and Montana Warren. So interesting, you got a couple of quarterbacks there as well. But again, I really, and even the younger guys on this list, the CJ Fights and the Montana Warrens, some true sophomores in their own right. Sam Levitt, a redshirt freshman. Sean Na'a, also a true sophomore. Those are also guys that you have been hearing, even outside of, just perhaps getting into this list, that even going back to last year, guys who have been really kind of, revered for their leadership qualities and really impressed in making their mark.
Yeah, because when you had the season that you had last year and guys had to be thrown into duty, you talk about a guy like Sean Na'a. That story is going to be legendary forever of him being told on the trip there that, hey, you're starting at left tackle against one of the best defensive ends in the country. Best of luck. It's trial by fire, baptism by fire, however you want to describe it. So that kind of makes you have to take on some leadership roles, even if it may not be your style, and maybe it is for these individuals. So that's great to see. I believe there are also 2 names on there that are newcomers, Sam Levitt and Keyshawn Elliott. And Keyshawn Elliott should very well be a leader of the defense. And if Sam Levitt's QB1, you need to have him in a leadership component. So that's great to see for them as well. So these are hugely important things, and I think really maybe now more than ever, just because of the nature of the sport and the immense turnover of the roster that occurs every single year. You don't have this group, this core group of 60-plus guys who've been together for at least a few years, and then maybe 20 or 30 that have been together for 3-4 years and that sort of thing. And then you add on the newcomers. It's just such a turnstile that leadership, I believe, is more imperative now than maybe it's ever been. So this is a great thing to recognize these players, but to also instill that sense of leadership in the program and make it something perhaps to be sought after. The ones that aren't on this council, this committee right now, maybe that's something that's like, hey, I'll step up my game in the leadership department so that I can be a part of that in the future.
Yeah, so we'll maybe look to our guy Cole Streeper to get the uniformity breakdown of the new Pat Tillman patch when it comes out, because that's certainly going to be pretty cool. Let's break down fall camp, Joe. There's a lot of battles that are up ahead, a lot of position groups that are in flux, some that are perhaps a little bit more locked down than others. But as we talked about in our prior episode when we broke down our 10 most important non-quarterback Sun Devils, we highlighted some of these guys that are going to be playing a key role. Plus, the roster now is, of course, set at 84, down one from the usual 85 due to the NCAA sanctions. As mentioned, Kenny Dillingham said only 3 guys by name have their jobs locked down. Lee Fatanu, Ben Coleman along the offensive line, and then defensive tackle CJ Fight. Now, I think that there are some that pretty obviously are going to be in that starting job, perhaps
like the team MVP from last year, perhaps.
Yeah, so we'll get to. So I think that might be some motivation, some gamesmanship at play, but that's not to say there isn't going to be a lot of competition going on. And the practice schedule is pretty grueling compared to prior years. They're only getting, I believe they're getting like both of the first Sundays off, but other than that, they're going every day. So even through fall camp or through Camp Tonazona, this is going to be a pretty grueling schedule. And now they're going to ease off a little bit as they get into game prep and closer to the season. But it's an interesting approach, and I think that's one that after the depth issues of last year and the how they were able to, I think, adequately and perhaps we'll see it successfully bolster that depth and get some more quality guys in here, more talented guys, it might pay off.
Yeah, and I think if given the option, better to go more intense in the early going and then maybe scale it back a little bit, as you get into that game week versus maybe, the opposite. And that schedule, this is unaffected by the NCAA stuff, right?
Yes.
They're not docked practices or Kenny doesn't have to coach, with one eye closed or whatever in the hell the NCAA likes to tell people to do. So I mean, it's getting started for real. And as you mentioned, I mean, there are a lot of like starting position battles, but there are a ton of depth battles. You know what I'm saying? Like you have a lot of positions we've talked about a lot. We'll obviously talk about today, like running back, linebacker, where you have a small few spots and a lot of talent and a lot of bodies. Defensive line, there are literally 20 scholarship defensive linemen on the roster, and ASU doesn't play like a 20-0-9 defensive alignment or something like that. So you can't get them all on the field at the same time, is what I'm saying.
So also, plus the fall camp's also going to feature kind of the first trial runs of the new helmet-to-helmet communication. That's our helmet or sideline-to-helmet communication. That's going to be rolling out to the college game this year. Sideline tablets. You're going to have the analysts now that have been on staff but unable and prohibited from coaching during practices or games. Now they're going to be able to do so. So a lot of different like structural things and technological things that are going to be a little bit different to fall camp that the Sun Devils and every other institution in the country is going to be getting used to. But as we break down the position battles, we have to start at quarterback. Now, of course, Sam Levitt, as we talked about and broke down, he ended spring practices as the kind of the clubhouse leader. Kenny Dillingham said if the game had been played then, that he would get the nod. Of course, there are no games played in the spring. I don't know, as we've any Sun Devil fan.
R.I.P. to the AAF, right?
So, as any Sun Devil fan who has been around for a decent amount of time knows that the summer months can really change a quarterback battle and flip it on its head. Trent Bourget, of course, the wily veteran, the football IQ off the charts, one of the members of that leadership council. He's around. I believe he's one of 2 guys on this roster that have been around since 2019. So
that is accurate. Yep.
Yeah, along with Anthony Cooper. So the veteran himself, but also after the departure of Jaden Rashada, the ASU brought in Jeff Sims, the former Nebraska and Georgia Tech starter. So it's going to be interesting to see exactly how Marcus Arroyo and Kenny Dillingham orchestrate this. But I think right now, as we head into fall camp, it's Levitt's job to lose.
That seems to be the case. For those of you scoring at home or those maybe who haven't been scoring at home, looking at the personnel at quarterback for ASU just from like a year ago to right now, of course, you lose Jacob Conover, Drew Pine, and Jaden Rashada from last year. You bring in Sam Levitt. You bring in Jeff Sims. Of course, the common denominator, as has been the case for a handful of years, Trenton Bourguet. He's someone that doesn't quite get the respect that he deserves, I think, publicly. Someone that has shown tremendous flashes, especially in that 2022 season, but obviously there were limitations last year. So, we know what we get with Trenton Bourguet. A very, very brilliant football mind, a capable football player. You get the impression that this staff wants something more or something different because you're bringing in multiple quarterbacks, not to sit and wait for a few years, but to compete to start. Competition's a very good thing. I'm not trying to knock that one bit. As you mentioned, Sam Levitt exited the spring with major momentum, moving and looking, wearing that number 10, kind of like Taylor Kelly, and that's a name that we always throw out when we're talking about quarterback competitions. So we will see if that sustains. Jeff Sims, he's the most experienced player, I would say, in terms of career starts, probably among any of the, many of the skill players, that sort of thing. He has 25 career starts, and I think that's something that shouldn't necessarily be, scoffed at. Now then, I know, and legitimately so, a lot of folks are going to bring up the turnover issues, the ball control issues when you're talking about Sims. So with all three of these quarterbacks, there are strengths, there are weaknesses. There's an argument that any of the three could make to be the starter. There's a reason any of the three could be the third quarterback. So as you mentioned, I think that's total agreement that Levitt's going to probably enter fall camp as the first guy out there, but not necessarily guarantee it'll end that way unless the work's put in.
Yeah, what I thought really separated Levitt from the rest of the group the latter half of spring practices was his ability to push the ball downfield, and that rapport and chemistry he was building with wide receiver Jordan Tyson, who we'll talk about in a minute, was really starting to pay off, because you figure that this is going to be a team that's going to be able to run the ball pretty well, but they're going to need the passing game to really be several steps better than it was a season ago. And so it'll be interesting to see exactly how the staff orchestrates this competition, how they work in a guy like Jeff Sims, who came in after spring, who's got so obviously some learning of the playbook as well, but a guy with tremendous athleticism. So maybe it's another, harken back to the Taylor Kelly, that 2012 competition where you had maybe a guy like a Michael Eubank kind of come in and have some specific packages, because he was a talented runner in his own right. And, perhaps as Sims learns the playbook, he's still a guy who I believe has, rushed for a lot of yards in his college career.
Yeah, he had a very forgettable season at Nebraska last year, did Sims. But, before that, he contributed at Georgia Tech. So in his time with the Yellow Jackets, threw for a little under 4,500 yards, 30 touchdowns, 23 picks, and ran for a little under 1,200 yards, 11 touchdowns. So he can move a little bit. But again, just one touchdown throw with 6 picks last year for Nebraska. So he'll come in, he'll compete. He's got the experience to do so. And yeah, personnel-wise and, talent ability-wise, there are some similarities top to bottom among these three compared to that group that we always compare to from 2012 when you had Mike Bercovici, Taylor Kelly, and Michael Eubank all duking it out. Of course, history unfolded as it did with some incredible seasons by Taylor Kelly and some outstanding play by Mike Bercovici. Michael Eubank ended up transferring, starting at the FCS level, so we'll see what unfolds with these three.
Yeah, and so, of course, Kenny Dillingham and Marcus Arroyo have some pretty good track records of developing quarterbacks in their careers, so we'll see if that strikes again. Moving on to running back, cloudy picture, perhaps just like quarterback, but in a more positive way, because I think you have 6 guys on this roster now with some of the offseason additions that can really make a difference. And got to start up top with the guy who did literally everything last year, Cameron Scadaboo. He's leaner, he's in better shape, he's quicker, he's more agile, and by every account, and especially as evidenced by his spot on the Leadership Council, a guy who's really, really matured off the field from a season ago. So I think right now you have a guy in Scat that, you might not want him to be starting a quarterback again, or perhaps, to having that workload, but who despite, having more guys, more competition in that backfield, might be more effective just because he won't be asked to do everything.
Yeah, he could be fresh. I mean, this group has got talent, upside, and they've proven some things at this level. Among these 6, I mean, technically 5 because one of them's a true freshman, right? You have 4,658 career total Division I rushing yards among this group. That is a lot. Scat is the main leader because it's D1. What he did at Sacramento State still counts for sure, but other guys have contributed as well. Of course, not necessarily at Arizona State, but we're just talking about the resume that all these fellas bring to Tempe. Scat, again, you can't thank him enough. You can't pat him on the back enough just for doing everything he did last year. I mean, that is something that you probably won't see again. I mean, that is like 1940s and 50s football.
Bobby Mulgado.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, that is like that dude right there. If you look up and see why number 27 is hanging in the rafters of Mountain America Stadium and why nobody can wear it, it's because he had all-purpose guy back in the 50s, Bobby Mulgado. But Scat's not alone. So, obviously ASU returns both to Carlos Brooks and Kyson Brown. DeCarlos Brooks, he had a solid stretch. He only played in 5 games, but he actually set a single-season career college high in his rushing yardage. He had 259 yards, ran for about 5.5 yards a carry. He had that 3-touchdown game against Washington State. He can play fullback. Like, he's someone that kind of quietly could be a factor. Kyson Brown returns after getting some action as a true freshman. So if that were it, if you just return those guys, you'd still feel pretty good about the position group, right? But then ASU made 3 additions, and it baffles me in like the best way possible because running back isn't necessarily like a zero-sum situation. Maybe like quarterback where there's one guy and there's going to be one guy. Obviously, I know teams run tandem stuff, whatever, but there's not a lot of carries to go around, so that kind of surprised me that ASU was able to acquire the talent it did. But hey, I'm not jinxing it here. They're here. You know what I'm saying? So starting that list, Raleek Brown, of course, came over for spring drills. We've talked about him quite a bit. Very exciting, very, very diverse skill set. A former 5-star, top 25 overall prospect out of high school. I mean, this guy has massively high credentials coming out of high school. The whole deal at USC. They just wanted to switch him to a wide receiver, did that. He's a running back. So now he's ASU's. And see someone I'm sure that's going to be coming out. There are a lot of guys on this roster that we've talked about and obviously will today talk about having a chip on their shoulder, something to prove. I think he's high up on that list.
Yeah, and I thought that in spring practices, of course he showed the home run speed, the shiftiness, the game-breaking ability, but really kind of impressed me was the ability to run through the tackles with power. He was able to kind of lower his shoulder and run and truck some dudes as well. Now, that's not something that you want him to do, at the frequency of a Scattaboo or DeCarlos Brooks, but Raleek looked really good. And with his skill set of being able to catch the ball and make some plays along the perimeter, I think that's going to be a nice little matchup chess piece for Marcus Arroyo to utilize. And you mentioned some of the other newcomers then that came in after spring practices, and Alton McCaskill, the Colorado transfer who really made his mark as a freshman at Houston. 18 total touchdowns during that freshman season where he was named the AAC Freshman of the Year. And then the 4-star from the Pacific Northwest coming in as a true freshman, Jason Brown. A lot of talent for Sean Aguano to have at his disposal.
Yeah, when the item that keeps you up at night as a coach is how in the world am I going to get all these guys the ball so they can do their job, I think you're in a pretty good position. You know what I'm saying? McCaskill, I mean, I could say this about multiple guys. McCaskill is someone I'm really eager to see because, as you mentioned, it was a few years ago. It was in 2021 that he had that star-studded freshman season at Houston. As you mentioned, the 18 total touchdowns, came very close to rushing for 1,000 yards there, the American Athletic Conference Rookie of the Year that year. He missed the next season due to injury, transferred to Colorado, missed pretty much all of that, and obviously Colorado barely even tried running the ball. I mean, that was minimal effort there. No one's going to run for any. You could have Barry Sanders and Walter Payton in their prime back there, and they might get like 1.5 yards per carry based on what Colorado was doing. But a lot of excitement there. And then, yeah, as you mentioned, Jason Brown. I mean, this is a 4-star dude from Seattle. Had offers from a lot of places, Washington, Oregon, all across the country. He became a Sun Devil. So that's the kind of guy, talent-wise, I don't know if you keep that on the sideline. So going to be very eager to see how they mix things up, what sort of packages they have, how many times we see 2 or 3 maybe of these players out at the same time or more. I mean, just whatever creativity that Kenny Dillingham and Marcus Arroyo can come up with, and, of course, Sean Aguano, the running back coach. So, yeah, very, very excited about this group. It may be by necessity because we don't know what we're going to get out of the quarterbacks. We don't know how the wide receivers, obviously, which we'll talk about here in a moment, are going to, take that step up due to the departure of Elijah Badger. So it's good to have this, these spoils at running back, but ASU may very well need them as well.
So I talked to Sean Aguano earlier today and kind of asked him that question, like, how are you going to do this? Like, what are you going to do? He mentioned that ideally would like to have 3 guys kind of top the rotation and get some game flow. But he of course said that he's a guy, and we've seen this before during his tenure, which is kind of weird to say. Like, he's going into year 6. That's pretty wild.
Because I remember when it was such a move, to get him from Chandler. My goodness, time is ticking away. Yeah, and. But he's a guy that I think, not to get off track, but I hope that Sun Devil fans really appreciate him. You know what I mean? Like, just the mess of that 2022 season and taking over and doing such an admirable job as interim head coach. And I think he's someone, hopefully, the fans and followers appreciate him as much as he deserves to be appreciated. Yeah,
so as he's heading into the 6th year, this is probably his deepest room. But he mentioned that he would like to play 3 guys consistently. But that, to your point, Joe, that you might see packages where you have 2, maybe even 3 backs on the field, because a lot of these guys are very capable pass catchers as well. So good problem to have, but we'll see exactly how that all shakes out during fall camp and, of course, throughout the season. Now, moving on to wide receiver, where you don't necessarily have the 4,000-plus yards of combined production at this level, but you do, I think, have a lot of very interesting and intriguing playmakers at this spot, probably none more so than Jordan Tyson, who ended spring on a thermonuclear note. He was on fire, scoring some big-time touchdowns and working that connection with Sam Levitt. But one thing I think is working in the favor of this group is that you have a lot of guys that are very capable and in different ways in terms of their skill set. You have Troy O'Meara with that big body who can make those big contested catches. You bring in Malik McClain, from Penn State, former Florida State athlete as well. You got another physical presence there, but then you have the prototypical sharp route runners like a Melquan Stovall or a Jake Smith. Xavier Guillory's a burner. So I think that while you still have a lot of questions, and rightfully so, about whether they can produce when the lights are on and on a consistent basis, you love, I think, the variety of skill set and weapons at your disposal.
Yeah, obviously the departure of Elijah Badger, that's a huge blow. He's ACU's leading receiver the last 2 years, someone that very likely has an NFL future. He's off in Florida now. But that creates opportunities for everyone else at every position. There's been a lot of hype, and deservedly so, about Jordan Tyson potentially being that next guy to separate himself from the group to be the top wide receiver. It's been put on the field. Often talk about that final stretch he had at Colorado in 2022. The final 3 games he played that year, he caught 13 passes for 344 yards. That's almost 27 yards a catch with a pair of touchdowns. He had 115 yards receiving against ASU that season as part of that. A lot of all-purpose yards, but he missed pretty much the entirety of last season. So he's one of these many players on the Sun Devil roster who have done things at the college level but haven't played for either a year or more. Fallen likes of Jake Smith, Ben Coleman, Xavier Alford, ones that we'll touch on here throughout the show as well. So he has that potential, but it's certainly not a locked-in guarantee that he's going to be that clear-cut number 1 guy. Talked about Melquan Stovall. I know, Brad, you've been very high on what he did in the spring. He's someone what he's done at the college level, I think, needs to be remembered. Prior to coming to ASU, he had 121 career receptions across his time at Nevada and Colorado State. Last year, had 18 receptions for 207 yards. So by comparison, a down year for him. So he's someone that can really step up a notch and will have the opportunity to do so. I've been big on Troy O'Meara. I think he's someone that, given those opportunities, he can really step up as well. He showed some red zone, jump ball, the prowess just to use the frame that he has. Malik McClain also has a big frame. He's going to be a good blocker. He can catch the ball. He's got experience. Jake Smith is just the one that I circle in this position group of just simply being excited to see him get back on the football field because he is someone that I have the actual date here. The last time that Jake Smith played in a college football game, December 29th, 2020, for Texas in the Valero Alamo Bowl. That has been a while. Whew. 2 years marred by injuries after he transferred away from Texas to USC. Last year with that baloney, bogus, we can slap one of those old parental advisory stickers on the show if I want to give my true feelings on that situation of why Jake Smith didn't play last year. But he is back. He's healthy. He'll be a contributor. So, again, there's a lot to be intrigued by from these wide receivers. I think fall camp, of course, is going to be an incredible proving ground because similar to what we mentioned at quarterback. There are guys that have some pros, some cons. These are not, no one in this is among those three guys with locked in positions. There's a lot to fight for.
Yeah, and then you have some younger guys on the roster. Corbin Hendricks has a nice size and speed combination. Caleb Black is a guy who's, I thought, really good, effective route runner, just needs to be more consistent in catching the ball. Coben Bourget is a very smart player, like his brother as well. One guy to watch, and I'm really curious to see, is true freshman Zechariah Sample, who's coming over from the state of Texas, part of that Texas Tempe pipeline. Absolute burner. I mean, he won these weekly Speed Demon Awards multiple times over the course of the offseason. So really kind of curious to see what he's able to do. Moving on to tight end, Joe, where it's a position that really has been completely overhauled from last season. Jalen Conyers is gone. Bryce Pierre is gone. Ryan Morgan's gone. So you have a couple of guys in Marqueston Douglas from Florida State, Cameron Harpole from San Diego State, who were here in the spring and were able to show some good stuff. I think Douglas right now is entering camp as the presumed starter at the position, but he'll have some competition because Cameron Harpole, I thought, ended pretty well, but ASU added Shimon Mateer, who has scored 5 touchdowns for Cincinnati a season ago, 6'5", 245-pounder. He had a cup of coffee at Colorado briefly, but before coming down here to Tempe. I think he has the potential to be a real X factor for this position.
Yeah, I mean, he had a solid. Cincinnati was a disaster last year, but he had a good season. 23 receptions, 258 yards, as you mentioned, 5 touchdowns. That led the team last year for Cincinnati. And then Douglas, by comparison, he at Florida State last year had 11 receptions for 136 yards. The year before, 14 catches for 190 yards for 25 receptions for Douglas over the last 2 years. That's pretty solid, for a guy that was a backup looking for a new destination, as he did coming to Arizona State. So even though that position group, and it's the only one on the roster where you got nobody back from last year, even there, that is that overhaul. Even though you lose Jalen Conyers, who, again, at this time last year, we were talking about he's going to get through this season and go be a first, second-round pick. I mean, that was the narrative about that guy last year. Didn't come to fruition. Bryce Pierre was supposed to be that next guy up, and he bolted to UCLA. So it's been chaos for Jason Mons and others to have to deal with. But I think it should still be a strong group. I know this is not the show where we do like our prop bets and predictions of, a statistical nature, but I believe the math adds up to 55 receptions that the tight ends had for ASU last year. Be interesting to see how close, or maybe beyond that, they come this season. But I think Mateer is going to be one of those players of which there are many where, you may not know exactly who they are right now, but it may not take too long until you do.
All right, so moving to offensive line. Now, this is going to be a crucial spot. We've talked about it all offseason long. While the quarterback position is deservedly kind of number one in everybody's attention rankings, the battles along the offensive line, I think, are going to be absolutely crucial. Now, we know that 2 of those 3 guys that Kenny Dillingham talked about as starters that are penciled in as camp opens up: center Leaf Fatanu, left guard Ben Coleman. After that, here we go. Starting off with kind of the options at the other guard spot, you have Sean Na'avi, who, as Joe mentioned, really kind of impressed in terms of being thrown into the fire as a true freshman. Battled, earned a spot on the leadership council. He looked good in spring, even though he also saw some work at center. So perhaps he's laying the groundwork for the center of the future. Kyle Scott, the junior college transfer, bumpy transition to the D1 level a season ago, but he seems to have figured things out. He looked much better in spring. You have Joey Sua, a big-bodied Arkansas transfer. Cade Briggs is veteran and versatile. But, Joe, I think the tackle spots are going to be absolutely crucial because you need somebody to lock those down because the tackles kind of struggle a little bit in spring. Yeah.
Of that group you just mentioned, I think a lot of folks would agree that it would be probably a surprise if Na'a didn't win that, as long as everybody is healthy and things like that. But there will be competition. But, yeah, both tackle positions, there will be competition. Now, ASU, they've made some acquisitions to beef up those spots, whether it's Josh Atkins coming over from Hawaii, where he started, I believe, the entire season last year. You got Jalen Clem coming over from Washington, who got a little run there and also spent some time at Kansas State to help, fortify those tackle positions. You got Emmett Boley coming back after, a horrible injury that he suffered early last season. He's the longest tenured offensive lineman, at least as far as guys on the roster. Max Ahanachor, he's someone that's developing more and more every day, as we've talked about, as Brad's mentioned several times. Still relatively new to the sport. So you have those. Bram Walden is someone that can play a few different positions and compete for time perhaps at tackle. So you've got a few guys. These guys are going to compete, which is good. The ASU added some depth through the transfer portal, which is good. But just behind quarterback, this is, to me, easily the most significant position battle if we're specifically talking about left tackle, but both tackle positions. You don't want to see one of those situations where you want to see it be the winner is the best of what's around, not just the ones that are kind of surviving and making fewer mistakes than others. So that's going to be just critical. I mean, these positions, offensive tackle, it's going to be the performance and how they go. That's going to dictate wins and losses.
Yeah, I'm really high on Maxi Hanachor. I put him on, I think, number 6 on my list in our last episode of the 10 most important Sun Devil non-quarterback players for this upcoming season. I really think that the way he ended spring and the tool set that he has and his a guy that he has not played this sport too often in the last several years. He was a basketball player, but he has a great frame and he's starting to figure things out. The athleticism is evident, so it's going to be real interesting to see exactly how things shake out. But at least you have this foundation where you feel good about your center and you feel good about your left guard. So you got 2 of the 5. You're 40% of the way to feeling good.
Yeah, there you go. And one of the names that we talked about, one of those 3 players that presumably has a solid starting position. We talked about Ben Coleman. You've heard us bring him up several times over the last couple months. We have had him here on the show. We've talked about it, but we'll remind you again. So what we're doing is we're basically partnering up with Ben throughout the course of this 2024 season. So what does that mean? That means that we are going to be having him do his thing and host what's going to be called Unblocked by Ben Coleman. See, it's creative, that title. It's like, usually he's blocking dudes, but he's letting them in. He's letting you all in. Everyone, all of us, we are all unblocked. So he's going to give us just basically a peek behind the curtain, talking about the life of a Sun Devil student athlete. As we know, things are very different now than they were even just a few years ago, let alone decades ago. When we were in college, or those who might be watching and listening played college sports. It's just a different thing now. So to get that input is a really, really cool thing. Obviously, he's got a degree from Cal, a degree from Arizona State, tremendously bright guy. So we're going to kick that off this week. So depending on when you're listening to this, we may or may not have launched the first full video that Ben put together from the haircutting event that DeCarlos Brooks had a handful of weeks ago. But we're also going to check in with Ben here, see what he's been doing this summer, see how he's getting prepared for fall camp, and see what impact the release of NCAA Football 25 has had on this Sun Devil football program. Joining us now, as he will throughout the season as part of his Unblocked by Ben Coleman series he's running with us here on Speak of the Devils, is Sun Devil offensive lineman Ben Coleman. Ben, my man, appreciate you joining us. How you doing this evening?
I'm doing great, man. Appreciate y'all having me.
All right, so Ben, we last caught up with you about a month ago or so. So what's been going on? Obviously fall camp is getting underway this week. So, what is this kind of the last month heading into a fall camp? You guys are wrapping up this strength and conditioning program. What's all been going on your plate for the last month or so?
I think pushing as hard as we can. We all know it's that final stretch. I think it's been really important details, little things. Player run practices have become even more important. And all the coaches told us, in May, that June was going to fly by. In June, they told us July was going to fly by, and now here we are. So I think it's been good. Coach Joe has pushed us harder than really that we ever have. He said this is the hardest that he's probably pushed the group, especially here. But he's coached around for a long time, and he feels like we're strong compared to guys that in class that he's had before. So I think we feel confident just hearing the feedback from him and the progress that we've made. And our guys have made tremendous progress on the team.
So this week, our followers, our viewers, our listeners are all going to see the first installment of your Unblocked by Ben Coleman video series, where we're going to get inside look in the life of a Sun Devil student athlete. And that first video is going to be from what occurred last month at DeCarlos Brooks' Cut Back, Give Back haircut event. You get into a lot of depth with this, Carlos. We don't need to spoil it here and have folks be sure to check out the video. But what was that experience like for you? I know that you and DeCarlos go way back. Of course, you both came to ASU from Cal. So what was that day like for you to be there, to experience what went on and the great things that DeCarlos is doing in this community?
Well, I think just anytime you're giving back to the community, I think that's important, right? Use your platform, especially guys that, I know Coach Dillingham want to bring a lot of guys back here to Arizona. So I think that's important that guys, are giving back to the community, that essentially raised them and gave to them. This is the second year I went to the event. Last year, it's a whole different thing. Last year, I just went to support, right? One of my teammates hosting the event. I want to be there and support. So I think this time around, I think it was even more important to be there again because just want to see the progress. There's a lot more kids. And I thought it was really beneficial to see just the progress that Delos has made for his event because I'm sure he'll continue it. And he's come a long way from being his roommate and, using, lamps to cut to now, hosting events, such as what we did, a couple weeks ago. I think it's really important. And I think it's pretty cool to see just from a friendship and a teammate perspective to see him kind of progress. And that's something that, that's dear to his heart. So I think that was really important and cool to see.
So real football's getting underway here this week, but the talk of the college football landscape for a while now has been the release of the new EA Sports college football video game. So obviously, a lot going on. What has the release been like for you and your teammates, and just what is it like just seeing yourself now finally represented in a game, and who's the best player on the team right now, and who's got the biggest problem with their ranking?
Well, I don't even know. I don't even know as far as ranking. I think as far as body types, right? Because D-line, they all think they're built like Greek gods, especially TJ and stuff like that, right? So I think they're a little. We knew we were going to get done bad as offensive linemen, right? We're big, hefty guys, but when you got guys like the D tackles, they're not really feeling the chunkiness that's associated. They want to be. I'm like, hey, do you want to be 300 or you don't want to be 300? You're like, let me know what you want. So I think that's been more of it, right? Guys, look, I heard it, Xavier Alfred said, man, I don't like my dreads in the game. I'm going to change that. I don't like the way my dreads look in the game, So I think that's, more of, how people look, right? Their swag's not accurate. Xavier Guillory, he always kind of rocks that crop top with the six pack out. And so the first thing that I saw in his story was he edited his entire player to look just like him. But, the guys have been excited. I think it's been, bringing a lot of guys together. The game room that we have in the facility, it's been lit. There's been a lot of battles. I've seen Dilly play Justin Watley. So far, I love Dilly. It's not been going well for him. I know I think he's got to get the gameplay. He's a little too realistic, right? He breaks on the game. You guys know that. His cerebral as far as football IQ is insane. And so, watching him and Watley play and him break down the entire defense, and then throw a pass to beat that defense. And it just results in getting blown up because, the animation part, everybody knows there's a big animation part to this game. It's not too much skill. But as far as players that have been playing, Scat played Vontez Burfict. I think that was really fun to see. It was actually a really great game. And, Scat lost, but that came down literally to the last second. So I think that was really fun. But, guys have just been spending a lot of time with each other. And I think that's something that's important, especially, in this phase is, just the little things. I'm sure in fall camp, it'll be busy. There's a lot of talk going around, about guys getting on the game. They've always talked about it, Call of Duty, Rainbow Six Siege, all these different games. But I think with the NCAA, I think it's been a different level of competition because being able to see yourself on the game is pretty surreal.
So you talked about fall camp that gets started here this week. We are creeping up on this season. So take us through and our listeners through, and viewers, of course. What's your mindset like this time of year? Obviously, you're a veteran. Though you missed last season, you're an established player. Of course, certainly expected to be a starting offensive lineman, but you can't get comfortable, right?
Right.
So what goes through your mind when you know that you're right on the cusp of these practices that are going to go by quick and get you right into the season?
I think the number one thing is you have to be consistent. That's why I try to tell young guys just that, a lot of guys are focused on the big picture. You show up every day, you be consistent. You be the same player you are. So, of course, you're going to improve. You can always control your attitude and effort, right? Everybody knows that across the board. But the biggest thing that I've always wanted to be as a player is that I want to be consistent. Hey, what is Ben Coleman? He's consistent. What does that mean? Consistently this, you can break it down from there. But you want to be consistent. We're going to get the same Ben Coleman every day because everybody talks about, day 1, 2, 3. That's easy. I want you to be able to say that Ben Coleman is still the same problem he was day 1, full energy, day 3. Now we're at day 16 of fall camp, right? And even the off days included, right? The off days is still, mentally you're still locked in doing stuff. So, day 16 on or off the field, where are we at? And so I want people to be able to say, Ben Coleman is still consistent. He's still that same guy, regardless of the mental and physical toll that, that naturally happens throughout fall camp.
So when you're looking ahead to the opener coming up quickly on August 31st, when you guys host in Wyoming, what are the things that you have to set forth for the goals that you want to get accomplished during fall camp, whether on and off the field to make sure that you're ready to go, ready for game ready. Knowing especially that it's been a while since you've been in live game action.
I think just trust myself. I know a lot of people will go back and watch old film. That's something that ex-Alfred does a lot too. You guys see it on social media, and when he posts that stuff, I know it's not really for him. It's not a reminder to. It's not for anybody else. It is for him. It's not a reminder, to anybody else, the player he is. I think sometimes, you got to take a look at yourself, like, what were you? And you're probably a better player you are now. I'm sure X is smarter. I'm sure he's bigger. I'm sure he's faster. But I think it's just a reminder. I'm sure Jake Smith, it does the same thing. And I've done the same thing as well. You go late nights, you get a little discouraged, whether it be injury or, them, with the ruling. You got to take time to really remind yourself, what were you like as a player, right? What plays did you make? Because you can still make those plays. And now I believe with a better strength staff and, a better coach that I feel is, preparing me to get to the next level. And I'm sure the other guys feel the same way. Talk about guys like Jay Smith or Hines Ward. I don't know if he's going to have a better leader, role model, and coach to be able to look after, right, that has done it. So I think it's important. I think we're kind of all in that same boat. You can probably put all of us together. Also, same thing with Jordan Tyson. So I think that's the biggest thing. Just remind yourself who you are, right? We've been at that level. We've made these plays. So I think that's what spring ball was for. So I think now it's more about just getting in the rhythm, right? Make the small tweaks. I think spring ball for all of us was kind of like that thing to, throw yourself back in the fire, get back comfortable. So I think now it's just about, what small things do you have to tweak and understand that a great team, Wyoming, is coming in here. And I'll tell you this, Arizona State is not going to take Wyoming easy at all. It's a great program. We saw what they did last year with Texas Tech, which is another Big 12 team, that went up there, and they're a problem, and they're a problem every year. So I think that's important that we all realize is that, as a unit, that whatever we have to get accomplished, the opponent's the opponent. We're not taking anybody lightly, and we want to be the best. We want to be the best in the country, especially talking from an offensive line perspective. So I think it's really important that we merge together one. I'm sure you guys have seen it with Coach Dillingham. There's a lot of positions up for grabs. So I think we're comfortable. I think we have depth. And I think that's going to help us, throughout the season, especially initially. But, the O-line, we're a close group. So I think the biggest thing is that we're just going to get the small little things in line now so that when that first game rolls around, we can have a good starting point and then we continue to progress throughout the season.
And the last question for this weekly check-in with you here, Ben. As a whole, as fall camp's about to get underway, how would you describe the feeling, the vibe around the team right now?
I think excited. I think last year was a fluke personally. The reality is, you make your bed, you lay in it. And that's what happened last year. The reality is we won 3 games. It doesn't matter who was with. It doesn't matter who was on staff, who wasn't on staff. And it all starts with our head coach going down. And we're confident in our head coach. We're confident in our position coach. We're confident in our strength coaches. And then most importantly, we're confident in each other. So I think last year we do all say it's a fluke. I mean, that's just how we feel about it. The reality is we played the games, and the result was what the result was. So we will own that 100%. But I think this year we're more excited. We made great additions. Shout out to the coaching staff and the recruiting staff for bringing guys in here. Just from a personality wise that I think fit well with this program. I think fans should be excited for any new additions because Coach Dillingham is not bringing anybody else that doesn't want to be here, and 2 that fit the program and the morals that we talk about every day, right? And so, I think everybody's excited from top to bottom. There's a lot of new guys that that are competing for a position. But there's nobody selfish. We don't have an ego problem on this team. And I think we all want to see each other win. And that's just going to lead to the bigger goal of all of us winning each game. So I think Sun Devil fans have something to be excited about. We've worked harder than we've ever worked. I mean, I've been in college for a good minute now. And I'm trying to tell you, we have never worked. When we finished that last workout on Friday, everybody just shook their head like we have never worked this hard. And even last season, we thought we worked hard. And it's a clear difference. So I think we're excited. And most importantly, we feel prepared.
Well, Sun Devil fans, you'll be hearing from Ben all throughout the 2024 season as part of his Unblocked by Ben Coleman segment with us here. Ben, my man, as always, truly appreciate you, my friend.
No doubt. Appreciate y'all. Go Devils.
Some really great stuff there from Ben, and as Joe mentioned, we'll be talking with him all throughout this upcoming 2024 season. Now, getting back to our camp preview, Joe, let's stay in the trenches at defensive line. Let's start inside at defensive tackle. CJ Fight is ascendant, and he's, I think, on the brink of stardom. I think we both had him on our top 10 most important player list for this upcoming season on the Leadership Council as a true sophomore. So you like where his trajectory at one of the defensive tackle spots. The other spot, I think, also you feel pretty good about, even though I think there's going to be some interesting battles. Jacob Kangaika is an absolute beast. His strength there. I think is going to be a real factor, especially in that run game. Jeff Clark's maybe a smaller guy, but quicker. And I think that he was really in the backfield a lot during spring practices. Really impressed there. JP Dieter, I thought, finished spring practice on a high note as well. You had Zach Swanson, the former Brophy standout, who was at Texas for a couple years. I think right now you feel pretty good about kind of those groups. You of course see some other guys like Landon Thomas, Kyron Borda in there, Blazing Lono Wong, but it's good. I think if you have like a top three or so of CJ Fight, Jacob Ngika, Jeff Clark, perhaps in some situational downs, sprinkle in some Swanson and Dieter, I think you got the makings of a good upfront defense.
Yeah, and you got, as you mentioned, you got some different skill sets among those top level guys. So it's not like it's a carbon copy of one another. They bring a little different something to the table there. We've talked about this several times. Really happy with the work that ASU did, the transfer portal and the defensive line, because they needed to replace some significant players, and you need to build depth. I mean, ASU has 20 scholarship defensive linemen on its roster. Now, one of them being Anthony Cooper, who warrants a mention, of course, going to be out for the season due to injury. One of the absolute longest tenured players on the entire roster and the longest tenured player on defense for ASU. So someone like a Michael Matus, who I'm sure can bring some leadership and bring value to this program, even if he's in the locker room, on the sidelines, things like that. But again, yeah, you feel good because of the potential. CJ Fight showed quite a bit his freshman year. He's expected to take a significant leap year one to year two. Jacob Ngika played for a particular school in the southern part of Arizona and showed some flashes kind of in a rotation role. They had a solid defensive line last year, so he's looking to take that next step. Jeff Clark has done some impressive things, I believe, at Georgia State prior to transferring to Louisville last year. So, again, you got a little bit of experience there in a guy like Clark, but others who a little hungry. We talked about that chip in the shoulder thing earlier. I think they got that.
So moving on to defensive end and the edge position, I think you're in great hands with Prince Dorba and Clayton Smith as your presumed starters there. I think that Dorba was on a really good path before that dislocated elbow injury a season ago. And then Clayton Smith, what he was able to do during the offseason, reshaping his body, he's up to 250 pounds, absolute menace during spring practices. So I think you feel good about that set right there. But then you had a Justin Watley, who has the versatility to play inside or out, the Cincinnati transfer. He had a really good spring before he got dinged up a little bit. Elijah O'Neal, the junior college transfer, really I thought played pretdy well when he was asked, and his number was called a season ago. Most notably, I think in the Washington game, made some big plays there. Jamon Tapp, another. I actually just kind of think they have three former Longhorns on this defensive line with Dorba, Tapp, and Swanson now. So Tapp is going to be, I think, another interesting piece there because he looks every bit of the kind of prototypical edge rusher in modern football.
Yeah, so I think obviously you lose B.J. Green, and he stacked up some numbers last year. But I think the whole landscape at the position, I don't expect a significant drop-off. And there even could be, if the stars align, a little bit better on the depth. Elijah O'Neal is someone that I'm really expecting to end on a high note for Arizona State. Jamon Tapp is someone, he was a big-time recruit, I believe a 4-star guy heading to Texas. Obviously, Texas can recruit. So if guys are going there on scholarship, they did something right? I believe he's from the state of Louisiana. He's someone that can really jump out and get in that rotation and mess up some offensive lines, some quarterbacks, some running backs. Talk about Watley. That versatility to be able to play a few different line positions, that is huge, and he contributed at Cincinnati. So, again, you're getting guys that have been there and done that, and you're going 2, maybe even 3 deep at defensive on the defensive line at edge. You feel confident in that. So if you keep those top-notch guys healthy and in games, not getting those penalties that can affect you in a negative way, let the rotation guys do their thing. Could be impressive.
All right, so at linebacker, I think you have 5 really capable options, all with experience at this level. And I think you might have the highest floor of any position group on the defensive side. You're of course bringing back Tate Romney, who I thought played pretty well in spots. Caleb McCullough, another long tenured Devil, who's been really just when his number's been called and stepping up in some big moments. I thought played pretty well. And then of course the trio of transfers: Jordan Crook from Arkansas, Zyrus Fiaseu from San Diego State, and then Keyshawn Elliott from New Mexico State. All 3 had their moments during spring, but I think as we talked about last week, Keyshawn Elliott is a guy that perhaps could have the highest ceiling of this group.
Man, he was just a stat book guy, a box score filler at New Mexico State, triple digits in tackles, and a lot of other things as well. Someone that it's like one of those guys that he committed to transfer here. It's like, all right, that dude needs to be a guy, because if he can do it there, and obviously New Mexico State had a good season last year,
10 wins.
like he needs to bring that to the table at Arizona State, because you need these contributors. And Fiasea was a similar deal at San Diego State, another stat filler there as well. Jordan Crook started some games and had some flashes at Arkansas. So these are not necessarily guys that ASU just took a total flyer on. They haven't played, and maybe they can do it at this level. These ones have impressive resumes. And you also have some younger guys, Gavion Thunderbird, Martell Hughes. And even a guy like Crew Jackson's been around for a while. I believe you got 8 scholarship linebackers, for the defense that usually throws 2 out there. So a lot of competition in depth.
Yeah, really curious to see not just the 2 starters, but just can those younger guys make a move? Kavion Thunderbird was a very heralded recruit. The staff was very excited to land him, I believe, coming out of the Chicago area. But Martell Hughes was kind of a spring standout for me. Obviously he was a true freshman, so finding his way in kind of the playbook and the scheme. A guy who was a converted safety, so he just got on, was learning the position, but I thought finished very well. Also, a walk-on to watch for is Prairie Young Black Goat. Obviously, one of the best names on the team, but a guy coming from Northern Arizona, and so kind of that small school chip on the shoulder that it was kind of impressive in talking to him. So I think he's got some really interesting intangibles as well as a nice frame. So. Not necessarily saying that he might be, challenging for a starting spot, but it's a guy that could perhaps, with that mentality and his skills, maybe contribute a little bit early on the special teams side of things. Moving on to the defensive backfield. Let's start off on the good spot where you feel comfortable. Safety. Shamari Simmons, it's last year's team MVP. Xavier Alford, I think, is going to be all Big 12. And that's going to be maybe my hot take right there. But then you add Ghost Rouser, who also, along with Keyshawn Elliott on that New Mexico State team, a key contributor there. Montana Warren, Kamari Wilson, a one-time blue chip recruit from Florida. That's a really solid group of 5.
How in the world Shamari Simmons is not the 4th guy that has a guaranteed starting spot? Hey, maybe it's just done to light a fire, and he's going to be like the super team MVP this year. I don't know, but obviously he had an incredible year last year coming up from the FCS level. Very good to have him back. Alfred's someone that I think could be an absolute breakout player. You got Rouser, Kamari Wilson, Montana Warren. I mean, you're going a few deep across the board, and not potentially not missing a beat. So when you have talent, when you have depth, when you got guys with starting experience, ones that might have been, high-rated recruits, that sort of thing, when you pretty much check all the boxes that you want to check across a position group, you're going to feel pretty good about it. So, and kind of like we talked about with, running back and wide receiver, to where, okay, there is a viable scenario where the ASU needs its running backs to carry the weight, because the wide receivers may or may not perform at the highest level, depending on what we see. I think that's a similar thing in the secondary, where you have high expectations for the safeties. The other group, I'm not saying you have low expectations, you just don't know what you're going to get out of some of the other positions in the secondary.
It's interesting. I just 3 of these 5 guys are on the leadership council, so that's good. That's good. You got a mix of veterans like Shamari Simmons, and you get a guy heading into second year like Montana Warren. So I think that position group is in good hands, both in the near or in the present and the near future. Things are, I think, a little bit less settled and of some, I don't say maybe concern, but at cornerback, you're losing your top 3 guys from a season ago. And of course, the mid-spring transfer of Ed Woods didn't do anybody any favors there, but you have some options here. But you have none of them, as of this point, have really made their mark or had a ton of production or experience at this level. Javon Robinson coming up from Washington State, LaTerrence Welch from LSU. I think those guys are nice. They both had good springs. I think Robinson was perhaps more consistent throughout. Welch was a guy who finished on a strong note. Keith Abney, who got a lot of run, played in 8 games for the ASU as a true freshman. He's a guy that I'm kind of actually surprised that he's not on the leadership council, but a guy that has that kind of Jordan Clark type of demeanor to him. And in terms of just maybe a smaller DB, but also just a guy who's very bright, very football savvy. I think those 3 guys could factor in a little bit as well. Keontae Bradley has tremendous physical measurables. But Rodney Bimage and some other freshmen as well, Tony Lewis and Kuba, Plaz, and then there's Plas and Chris Johnson. So you got 4 freshmen there, as well as some of the younger guys. It's going to be an interesting mix because this is going to be a league that, even though it is kind of, now back to the ground and pound, there's some dangerous passing games on this schedule.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's going to be a dog fight in fall for time here because there's nothing locked in. I mean, you can kind of default to seniority just in general and say, okay, guys like Javon Robinson, Terrence Walsh, they've got college experience. And a guy like Keith Abney does too, because the rest are a bunch of true freshmen and one redshirt freshman, but doesn't necessarily always work out that way. So I'd say, certainly on defense, this is going to be the biggest position battle. And aside from quarterback, and offensive tackle, probably the most significant one on the entire roster because things could look very different than you may expect. I mean, you could have a true freshman or more out there, starting or getting quality reps. So again, as fall camp gets underway on defense, watch to see what happens at cornerback there. And that's obviously going to impact the quarterback competition as well, because if you got guys that are being, on the ball and getting a lot of picks at cornerback, that could be something that impacts the quarterback decision as well. So certainly want to keep an eye on.
And then talking about some nickel, which, for ASU's categorization purposes is under the safety umbrella, but you have Mason Williams, another wily veteran who's been around since the Herm Edwards days. Many people thought that Cole Martin, the former blue chip guy coming in from Oregon, would kind of waltz in and take that job, but not so fast. Mason Williams had himself a good spring. So Cole Martin did as well. So I think that's an interesting battle that's to watch right there. Keith Abney, with his versatility, will be in that mix as well. But I think ASU, in terms of the nickel spot, that maybe that presumed third safety is. I think that you have all 3 solid options.
Yeah, I think ASU should be in perfectly fine shape there. Whether it's Williams, who has a tremendous amount of team experience, someone like Martin with a lot of upside, whomever it may be. I think you feel good at who's manning the spot there.
All right, special teams. A lot of question marks here, Joe. Now, Parker Lewis, who was a one-time All Pac-12 honoree at USC, spent some time at Ohio State, former Saguaro Sabercat, I believe, as well. He's coming in over the summer. He wasn't here in spring. Neither was true freshman Canyon Floyd, who was an outstanding punter for Horizon High School. What's interesting is that both of these guys can do both the kicking and the punting jobs. And, talked to Charlie Regal recently. He's very high on both those guys. And they'll be, of course, mixing up with the guys who are in here in the spring. And he's especially high on Parker Lewis in terms of his leg strength. Says he has an NFL caliber leg. And, whether it's just a kickoff specialist, but also a guy in punting who's routinely in that 5+ hang time area. But, special teams, Joe, is going to be very crucial this year. This team, I think, is going to play a lot of close games. And special teams had some ups and some downs a season ago, and there's some interesting decisions that people are still litigating about in terms of who redshirted or not last season. But I think with Lewis and Floyd entering this competition, it's going to be interesting because they weren't here in spring, so I think things are wide open.
Yeah. That said, which sounds weird, I feel more comfortable with the overall position group. I know hindsight's 2020, but more comfortable than you did last year. You got a guy like Lewis who has done it at this level, been an all-conference guy at this level, but he just has that kind of weird caveat where his tenure at Ohio State really just didn't add up to anything. But his time at USC was pretty special, and he was a pretty heralded kicker coming out of Saguaro High School as well. And he talked about Floyd. He's done what he's done, at the high school level. He's one of the most highly regarded kickers according to like Rivals.com in terms of recruits coming in for this year. So there are some reasons for optimism. I know that a lot of folks, especially after last year, just kind of a little cautious and not trying to get in over their heads, and obviously knowing that the jobs need to be competed for and won. But I'm going to go out on a crazy limb and think that both kicking games will be improved this year.
All right, we'll see. Long snapper battle, a little bit under the radar. Tyler Wigglesworth and Cole Marzalek were going to be in that mix as well.
Sounds like something like Harry Potter or something like that, or some butler, or him. I was gonna say no. It sounds like a butler, Wigglesworth. Wigglesworth sounds like a butler, like a Mr. Belvedere type of situation. Wigglesworth, fetch me my tea or something. I don't know. What do you get? I don't think I'll ever have
I was
a
thinking
butler.
almost like a Clue situation, like Wigglesworth with the revolver in the conservatory.
There you go. A lot of options. Tell us your favorite ways to use the name Wigglesworth. No disrespect to Wigglesworth. I'm sure he's heard quite a bit over the years of his life, and we're just adding to that.
And, of course, on the return game, some notable options there. Ragel's really high on the prospect of Jake Smith and Raleek Brown in that mix as well as some other guys. So we'll see exactly how that all shakes out. So there's the rundown. A lot of battles, a lot of jobs, and, of course, not just starting jobs, but positions in that too deep. But there's also a lot of new faces, but also some guys that have some opportunities returning. Joe, who are some wild cards on this in fall camp that you're going to be closely tracking?
So I got a bunch, like 5 or 6 that I'll mention after this one name because I think there are so many for ASU because you got a lot of guys that could be important contributors that you got to wait and see what they'll do. And so I'll throw out this one name, and I'm not necessarily saying this as a wild card for right now. And this may not turn into anything, but it's like when you look at when they update the rosters, for the fall, from the spring, you see some new names, and sometimes names kind of sneak in there, and they might ring a bell. And this one did to me. And so this is someone, again, I'm just eager to see what comes of his college career. May or may not, get off to a significant start in terms of playing time, but it might. The guy's name is Derek English. And so the thing about Derek English, so he went to Saguaro High School. He was a 3-star recruit according to Rivals. He had a 5.6 ranking, which is like right down the bullseye of a 3-star. So a solid recruit. He walked on at Arizona last year. His Rivals profile shows him having offers from ASU, Arizona, Florida State, Oregon, Penn State, Washington. He's a 6'4", 215-pound wide receiver. He's going to wear number 32 for ASU, at least according to the internet. He had some injury issues in high school, so I don't know. I think we'd have to tap into like Ralph or Chili or maybe get a little Cole Topham going on here. I don't know his story. I don't know why a guy like that who has scholarship offers and size and playing for a national power ends up as a walk-on. Didn't play at all at Arizona, but that's just a name on the roster that I see. That again, I don't know if it's this year. I don't know if it's ever, but I'm just like, I wonder if something will come of that guy. So that's like a long-term, big-time wild card there. But as far as ones that might be a little bit more specific to this season, I'm going to start with McCaskill at running back because he's someone that, again, pay dirt guy, scored 18 touchdowns in the season at Houston, just hasn't had much since. If he can get back to anything near that 2021 performance that he had, I mean, statistically, he has done more at the FBS level. I say that with a great deal of enunciation, at the FBS level than any running back on the roster for ASU. So we'll see what he can do. Jake Smith, he's someone that, his high school accomplishments are well known, at least around these circles, and what he did at Notre Dame Prep. The fact that he's been out of action for nearly 4 full years, but the talent that he has. He did it at Texas. Can he do it again? Shimon Mateer, someone that I think could be, that next in line, that next standout tight end for ASU. Flipping over to defense, those 2 backup defensive ends are the rush performers, Elijah O'Neal, Jamon Tapp. They are going to be, to me, what really determines how potent the pass rush is, because I think you have a good idea what you're going to get with those top 2, Ndorba, Clayton Smith. Well, what's the depth going to be? Can it be like we saw, you think about like that COVID season when ASU was rotating defensive linemen and really getting it done? Can you see that this year? And I'll top the list off with Cole Martin because he's somebody that, as we just talked about a moment ago, may not necessarily be the top nickel right now, though that is a pretty thin margin if he is behind, but someone with a high upside. And if he can come close to meeting his potential, that's going to be a big deal for the Sun Devil secondary.
Yeah, I agree that, on all those are going to be some interesting guys to watch. Mateer especially, if he's going to be able to really kind of elevate and become that kind of unlock his potential and really make the tight end position something to have for defense to worry about it when they face the Devils. I think Jeff Sims has got a part to play this season. I don't know if it's as the starter necessarily, but I think you got 2 very creative offensive minds. They like Jeff Sims. They obviously brought him in for a reason. That's some interesting, some tools at the disposal. And I don't think that necessarily he's going to win the job. At least, we'll see how things play out. But I think that he's got a role to play. I do agree that the Texas defensive line transfers and Zach Swanson, Jamon Tapp are going to be very interesting in terms of, what they bring to this roster. But I'm really going to I just got to go back, and we harped on it a lot, and I won't go over it too much. But the offensive tackles, I think that wild card I think is going to be Maxi Hanachor. He's a guy I think has the highest upside amongst that group of tackles. If he can tap in, and if he is going to be able to continue his strong spring and the gains that he made over the course of the summer into a formidable lockdown spot on one of those tackle spots, I think it's going to be a big time boost for the Devils. But we'll see. There's a lot of competition, a lot of grueling practices ahead. That schedule. I mean, they get Sundays off for at least the first few weeks of camp. That's a little bit unusual. So they're going to be hitting it hard as these jobs and these battles play out. All right, so I think that's going to do it for this episode of Speak of the Devils. I'd like to thank our guest, Ben Coleman. Watch out a little bit later on for the first drop of Unblocked with Ben Coleman, and you can do that by following us on social media. You can follow us on Twitter at SOTD Podcast, on Instagram at Speak of the Devils. Subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, and give me a follow on all things social at bdenny29.
And you can follow me at Joe Healy 42. We've been talking about it quite a bit, of course, lately. We will be out in the public, in real life, talking to real people. What a novel concept. Over the course of the month of August, coming up, that would be this weekend at Cactus Sports. Time is going to be announced if it hasn't already, but we will be there. Swing by Cactus Sports at any time of day on Saturday, August 3rd, and we might be there. How's that for a little bit of a tease? And then, of course, August the 17th at 100 Mile Brewing Company, we will be there talking with Graham Rossini, new athletic director, and others. So just keep tabs on our social media. All the information that you need will be there. And, of course, a huge thank you and shout out to our incredible sponsors, Jones Auto Group, devilsdigest.com, which is going to be having a fall camp special, I am told, starting on the 31st, not going for very long. You can get quite a bit. As a matter of fact, you know what? I have that information here. It will be an incredible 70% off a new annual
70
membership. It runs from July 31st through August the 4th. That is according to boss man Hode Rubino himself. 70% off a new annual membership. It's a great time to get that. You'll be paying just dollars, but fewer dollars by doing that. So check that out. Obviously, of course, thank you as always to Burrito Express, Spaghetti Shack, and Sun Devil Family Charities as well for their generous contributions as sponsors to this show.
All right, and also be sure to check out Home Field Apparel at homefieldapparel.com. They've got some amazing stuff coming down the pike in the month of August. The Can't Miss Kickoff 2024. It's involving 82 schools, over 300 new products, including some amazing boxes that are going to be absolute essential pickups for you at homefieldapparel.com. That's all getting kicked off on the 9th of August. I believe that is next Friday? That sounds right.
It will be a day of the week, that's for sure.
That is true. So check them out, homefieldapparel.com. Follow them on social media. We're going to be partnering up with those folks at The Good Brand again for 2024. And once you're done supporting all of our amazing sponsors, be sure to drop us a 5-star review on the podcast platform of your choice. And then join us again next week as we recap the early impressions from fall camp and get ready to go up the mountain to Camp T.